Hi there once again and welcome to another Expresso mechanic tutorial, and this is going to be the first in a new three-part series in which we're going to be building what we have on the screen, which is something I'm referring to as a Kinetic Sphere Exchanger. It's predominantly an Expresso project, though of course there will be some dynamics for the spheres and the wire forms that they're travelling through. In part one, we're going to be building what you can see on the screen now, which is the slide assembly. So we're going to be producing the actual wheel that drives the thing, the slide itself, the trough that it sits in, and also the gearing, which you can't see here, but there's two gears that are driven by a motor here. I probably won't build the motor because if you wish to, you can put that in yourself, but we'll build the gearing and we'll get all of this thing moving. In part two, we'll build these objects here, which are effectively pneumatic rams, with obviously a spring-loaded button here that needs to work at the right times. So that will be our focus for the second part of the tutorial. Finally, in part three, we'll focus completely on dynamics. So we'll build the wire forms and we'll get the spheres working in conjunction with the rams and make the whole thing hang together. So that's what we're going to be about in this series. So without further ado, let's see if we can make this happen. We'll start by bringing in a cylinder, orientate it plus Z. The radius is fine, the height needs to be 10, one height segment and 60 rotation segments just to make it nice and round. So that's our wheel. We'll, in our coordinates, raise it by 50 so that it's sitting just on the floor. And we can now think about where we're going to go from here. Now, for a start, we need to make this, well, I'm going to change the display to Garrett lines actually and isopalms for now. So that's all looking nice. What we can do is make this editable. And we can think about where we're going to go from here. For a start, what I'm going to do is select polygon mode, KL, and I'm just going to put a cut through there. And we can then think about selecting with UL, a loop selection here, and we can hit D for extrude and extrude by 30. And that gives us a spigot that we can attach a gear wheel to. And we'll do that a little bit later. So we've got things underway and we've got our wheel. We can now think about adding a pin which will be used as a driver for our slide. So that's going to be our next port of call, and in order to do that we'll bring in another cylinder. We'll orientate this one plus, nope, not plus X, we need it to be the same as the wheel, so plus Z. Again, one height segment is fine, we can give it 60 rotation segments for what it is. It wants to be much smaller, so the radius needs to be 5. Its height can be 20, and we can bring it up to around 85. I think we'll be fine for that. If we just say 85, that looks good, and we can bring it forward just by eye until it's about there. That's fine, and we can group the cylinder 1 into our main wheel, so we'll call this pin, and I'm just going to call this wheel, highly original name. So that's fine, we've got the two of those working, and that's going to do what we want it to. Moving on from here, we can think about building the actual slide and the trough that it sits in. That will be our next port of call. We'll start with the trough, and I'll bring in a cube, and this needs to be 250 in its X dimension by 10 along the Y axis and 20 along the Z axis. So 250 by 10 by 20. And that's perfect for our trough, and we can bring this forward so that it sits somewhere around there for now. We can always adjust afterwards. And then we need to think about how we're going to subdivide this up. So the segments along the y-axis, we can say we want 3. Let's just make sure that we place this in wireframe so that we can see what we're doing. In fact, we don't want 3 in the y. We want 1, or rather 2 in the y. And along the x, or rather the z-axis, I should say, we want 3. Because we're going to cut this section out, and we're going to make some adjustments as well to various aspects of this so that we get it set up exactly as we want it. We can make it editable. Go into polygon mode initially. Select this one and remove it. This one and remove it. And this one and remove it. And then we can work with our polygon pen tool and rebuild this. We'll also place ourselves in points mode so that it makes it easier to see what we're doing. Starting here, we'll replace this polygon. Finish that off. That's the first one done. Move around so that we can see a little bit better. We want this here, here. Let's just rotate round so that we can see where we are. This one, and finish it off there. And then finally we can start here with the last one and finish that off. And that's our rebuild complete. So that's great. So we can come out of our polygon tool, just hit escape. So that's all looking really nice. Now the next thing we can do is think about some scaling. So we can go back into edge mode for this, and we can loop select, so UL. We want these two, so just move a little bit around so that we can get that easily. Shift select that one, and we'll just scale these out. I mean, this can be done by eye. It's not that important because we can always adjust it afterwards anyway if we need to when we've built the slides. So we'll just adjust these out for now so that they're somewhere around there. That's great as a starting point. And I think we can leave the actual division here. We can leave that as it is. I think it looks fine. That looks great. It's going to work. That's going to be perfectly good for us. So that completes the building of our trough, and we can rename this trough. So that's great. That's all ready to go. It's an inanimate object, so we can just leave it at the top. I tend to leave the inanimates at the top of the object list. So that's looking great, and we can now think about building the slide piece. I'm just going to make the trough invisible for now and bring in a rectangle. If we hit H so that we can see everything, we can see it's massive and it doesn't need to be that big. So it needs to be 10 in the width and much, much smaller in the height. In fact, it probably needs to be, well, let's just say 85 for now. We'll bring it up in its coordinates. We'll raise it by 50 and bring it forward to here. Now that should be the right size. If we just change our view, so I'm going to switch to my front view, so F4, hit H so that we can see where we are. Now you can see that it's close to where it needs to be. In the object we'll add rounding because that will be exactly as it needs to be, and we do need to just lower it a little bit. So let's just bring it down to 80 in its height, which is perfect. That's exactly where it needs to be. Now we could argue that we can make that a little bit bigger if we wish to. We could say 80.5, and we could also make the width 10.5, because if we were to engineer this properly we would need a little bit of a gap, because otherwise the thing would seize up. So that's fair enough, we can do that. So that's going to be the inner part of our slide. It's going to be the part of the slide that the pin actually slides up and down in, technically, as it rotates and pushes the slide around. Moving on from here then, we need the outer profile of the slide piece, and the easiest way to build this is by setting up snapping, and we'll go to grid work plane snap and set that up. We can say grid point, and then we can use our spline pen tool and set this up from there. So we grab a hold of our spline pen tool and we'll start on this line here. I think we'll start from there, come out to here. I don't think we need to go any further than that. And we'll come down to just above the middle point and come out to here for now. Now, I'm not going to do this absolutely perfectly at first because we can adjust afterwards. That's the important thing. Now, these grid spacings are 5 centimeters, so 5, 10. That should be okay for us. Come back to about here, down to somewhere here, and then out to somewhere around here. That should be okay for us. So we'll drop that down there and then do the same thing over here. So just off of our center, where are we? We're coming to somewhere there. That should be the perfect size. Back to over here and out to there, over to here, up to here, and then not quite there, just on that line there, and then we can finish it off. So that's our profile for our slide piece. If we wish to, we can adjust these 2 points, and I would suggest that perhaps that might be a good idea. So if we just hit escape and just get our select tool, we'll switch to points mode and grab a hold of our spline again, grab these points here and just bring them down so that they're there. Now, what I may also do is just put a subdivision here, and I think also between these two as well. So hold down my control key, subdivide, and then these 2 points can just be moved upwards until they're about on this line here. Because what I want to do is create a rounding at the top. So if we select these 2 points and we add and we say rounding, we've got, in fact, what I need to, I think I may need to select some more points, but we'll try apply and see if it does anything. It doesn't, so we do need to select some more points. I need to select these 3. We'll do this one first and then hit apply. So we've got our first rounding, and then I can select very carefully. So go back into our select tool. If we select that, the center point there and that one, and then hit our arrow over here again, take us back to rounding if we can. Yep, we're back at rounding, and now hit apply. And that's perfect. So we've got the actual shape ready to go. Now the next thing is to get the spline aligned with the rectangle. So I'll group the spline into the rectangle, go into coordinates, and the Z value can be zeroed out. Remove that from there, and now they're both aligned with each other. We can think about, well, effectively we've got to make this editable, and then we've got to connect objects and delete. But what I'm going to do before I do that, I'm just going to group the 2 of those into and I'll call it originals, just in case there's any problems. And then I've got those 2 there, and I can simply copy these out of there to here, just bring them out of there, and then make my originals invisible in both the viewport and also rendering. Doesn't really matter for rendering, but I just do it as a matter of habit. Okay, so fantastic. So we've got our profile done for our slide, and what we can think about next is dropping it into an extrude. So first we must make them connected and deleted. So connect objects and delete, so that we've got a single spline, and then we can drop that. Oops, I've done it in the wrong ones. I've done it in the originals. Let's do it here. These are the 2 that I should have done. Connect those and delete, that's it. So we've got our spline profile, and then we can drop that into an extrude. So hold down the option key, drop it into an extrude. Far too big. Try 10, and I think that should be fine. That's a nice profile. That's looking really good. So that's our slide piece. Let's bring the trough back and see how things are sitting. So well, it's not bad, is it? It's not far off. So if we switch to our right hand view and hit H, we can just see where we are. Yeah, it's not bad at all. It's not perfect, but it's not far off, is it? So let's get a hold of that trough, just the object, and we can slide this into place somewhere around there. And that is looking great. Fantastic. So yeah, really pleased with that. That's looking great. Brilliant. So the next thing we can do, we'll make the two little M pieces that fit on here. We'll put those in place, and then we'll think about building the gearing system for it. Actually, before we do that, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. We need to rename this slide and just bring it down below the wheel. And we just need to move the trough and the slide. So I'll command select to select both of those, switch to my right hand view, so F3, and just drag these back until they're just level with the end of the pin. And that's fine, they're in the correct spot. That pin, actually, what we could do with the caps, we can just add a fillet. We can have 3 segments, and we'll just say 0.2, just to give it a little bit of a fillet. And the same thing, we can do that with the slide. Going to our caps, roundness, we'll put about 0.5 on it, just to make it look quite pleasant on the eye. Okay, so that's all looking good, and we've got that in place. The next thing then is to put the cylinders on the ends, so we'll do those. If we get a hold of a cylinder, this time the orientation does need to be +X, and it needs to be 10 in the radius, 10 in the height, and 1 height segment, and again we can say 60 for the rotation segments there, 1 in the height, 60 in the rotations. In the caps, again, we can put a tiny little bit of a fillet on it, just 0.2. And then we can think about placing this. So if we go into our front view, F4, we can just move this into position. Let's have a look, see where we are. In fact, the radius, I think we can make that radius a little bit less than that. I don't think it needs to be 10. Let's make it, let's have a look. Can we make, I don't know, let's just see where it is. Let's see where, if we go into our top view and just zoom in a little bit, just position this somewhere around there by eye. That will do, I think. Yep, that'll do nicely. So we'll look, see what we've got. Well, yeah, I suppose it's okay, isn't it? It doesn't look too bad, does it? I think that's probably going to work okay. I think we can leave it as it is. So yeah, 10 by 10, 160, that's fine. So we'll make a copy and just drag this one. Again, I'll switch to my front view, so F4. Drag this across until it lines up with that. Looking very nice. So we've got those two in place and they're looking good. The next thing we need to do is just open the slide, grab a hold of both of our cylinders and drop them under spline 1 in there. Moving on from here, we need 2 nulls, and each of these needs to be grouped into each of the cylinders, and we can say this one is T1, so T for target, and T2. You'll see what we need these for in the second tutorial, but don't worry about them for now, but they do need to be placed. So these need to be zeroed out. Let's just zero that one. Do the same with the other one. And then we can think about putting them in their final positions. So I'm going to switch to my front view once again, so F4. This can be placed here and this here, so they need to be on the leading edges of our 2 cylinders. As I say, don't worry about them for now. But anyway, those are in place and everything is set up and ready to go. The final thing that we need to do is create the gearing, and that's what we're going to do next. We'll bring in a cogwheel, and then we'll start to have a look at this. Now, 20 teeth is fine, and involute, of course, is what it's going to be. The orientation we can leave at 0 degrees. This needs to be 20, and this 25. Everything else is set up. It doesn't need to be touched. Now, in the inlay, we will need to worry about that because, of course, we've got to make this fit around this, but we'll worry about that in a second. The cog, what we'll do is group that into the wheel and again zero out and then we can think about bringing it to where it needs to be. We'll just take it out of there for now, put it back up the top, and we'll bring it over, and it can be somewhere there. That's perfect. Now let's hit O for the object so we can get a bit closer, just get a better angle so that we can see what we're doing, and then we can worry about the actual inlay. Let's go into there and we'll reduce this down. So let's see where it needs to be. Well, 10 is pretty darn good, isn't it? I think 10 is actually okay. That's going to fit pretty much spot on. So that's good. That's looking very, very nice. What we can do now is create another cogwheel, and we'll think about creating the small gear that drives everything. But before we do that, we might just as well drop this, I think, into an extrude. So holding down the Option key, we'll select extrude. We know it's going to be massive. Let's make this, say, let's try 5. I think 5 will be fine for that. And what we can then do is think about moving it back a little bit. So if we go into our right hand view, so F3, we can just bring this forward a little bit, see where we are. We should be able to just move that back to there, and that's fine. It's snapped into place, and that looks great. Let's get the caps. Let's just put a little bit of rounding on, go 0.5. Yeah, that looks good. I think we'll get away with that. That looks really nice. Great, so we've got our first gear wheel in place. Now I'm not going to build a support for this. I'm not going to bother. The reason for that is because the angle that I'm going to be viewing this from, I'm not even going to see it. But if you wish to put a support in for this spigot here, then please build one. But for the sake of getting on with things basically and not wasting your time, I'm not going to bother to do it. Okay, so we'll move on and we'll get our small gear wheel in place. What I may do, I think, is just copy this cog. I don't want the extrude, so I'll just remove it from there, just get rid of that. So I've got a second cog. Once again, it is of course an involute, and we want 5 teeth on this occasion. Just move it over here so that we can see what we've got, and we can see that this is way different. Now let's have a look and see what we've got here. If we change the inlay just down to 2, and let's just have a quick look in, I think we'll go into our front view actually and just see what this lines up like. Just see if it lines up okay. I'll just take the snapping off for now. Hit O for object, and we'll just see if we've got anything that works. Oops, I don't want to do that. Just move that into there. Well, I mean, that is going to work fine, isn't it? It's looking as if that will work pretty good for us. I think that's okay. So yeah, I mean, if you go into the teeth here, if you just say 5, everything else will set itself up. The pressure angle is okay. I mean, everything, you can change that to 22 degrees if you wish to, just to make it a little bit smaller, but 20 is probably going to work okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that will do what we want it to. That looks as if it's going to work fine. Great, so let's go back to our 3D view, so F1, and we will grab a hold of another extrude. So hold down the Option key, put that into an extrude. Once again, we need this to be just 5. In the caps, we can say 0.5 as we did before, and then we can think about snapping this into place. So let's go into our right hand view and drag this back. Let's put the snapping on, just drag this back to there, and that is fine. Yeah, spot on. That's really looking good. The inner, or the inlay I should say, is something I need to just work on. I think let's just go into here. Perhaps it's a little bit too big with 2. Let's go 1. In fact, what we could do, before we go there, let's just make this maybe 0.3. So that's perhaps a little bit better, but I still think that is a little too big with the inlay there. Let's make it 1.5. Yeah, I think that's better. That's better. Yeah, that looks as if it's sort of more natural. I think it would be a bit too big if it was 2. Great, so that's all set up, and that completes the amount of things that we need to build. So that's our build for this particular tutorial. So moving on from here, we can worry about Expresso. But before we do that, let's just call this drive sprocket. And just call this, I don't know, main gear. That'll do. So that's those two described. Brilliant, and that's all ready to go. We need two very simple Expresso expressions, so we'll get a null, name it Expresso, give it the first Expresso tag, and we're ready to start having a look at what we're going to do here. The first thing I'm going to do actually is create the gearing setup here. So we've got our drive sprocket, we've got our main gear. What I'm also going to do is group my wheel under the cog wheel of the drive sprocket, or rather, I beg your pardon, it should be under the main gear. That's where that should go. So those are all one now. And what we'll do is group that into a null and call it, we'll call it just drive wheel assembly. That'll do. Drive wheel assembly. So that includes the main gear and the wheel. And it's the driver for the slide. So we've got those in. The next thing to do, we'll drag in the drive sprocket, and we'll also drag in the main gear. Okay, so we've got those two in. If we just switch to our rotation tool, we can see what we're doing. So we want to work with rotation B here for both of them. These are the rotations that we're going to be interested in. So we can say coordinates transform rotation, rotation B at the output stage of the drive sprocket, and the main gear at the input stage, the same thing. So they're both set up and ready to receive what we're going to be placing between them. So we need a range mapper. Come down to calculate, range mapper, bring one of those in, plumb this into here. And now we can think about what we're going to put in here. Now we can set this up initially with degrees and the same at the output. So we know that we're going to go from 0 to 360 for the output because of course we want to rotate this through one complete rotation. But of course our drive sprocket here has only got 5 teeth. So there's 4 5s are 20. So this needs to rotate 4 times for this to rotate once. Therefore, we need to times 360 by 4. And that gives us 1440. What I'm going to do now is switch to radians so that we get these in radians and we don't have to do anything else. And that should actually be 1.571, I think you'll find. If we 1.571 is what that should be. That's 360 degrees as radians. So let's plumb this in here and see what happens when we move our drive sprocket. Now at the moment we can see that it's going to work, but of course this needs to be minus because it's got to go in the opposite direction. Let's see where we go, and we can see that that's going to work. If we just take the snapping off, because that's causing a bit of a problem, let's get a bit closer so we can see more clearly what's happening, and obviously that's working fine. So yep, that's set up and it's doing the job for us and it's looking really nice. Fantastic. So that's working. If we just select our drive sprocket coordinates and just zero that rotation out, we're back to where we need to be. So that completes our first expression. That's as much as we need there, just 3 nodes. Moving on from here then, we need another expression, and we're just going to look at this from the front view. We need the pin to drive the slide. That's going to be the next thing. So let's just see where we are here. So our pin, if we just take a quick look, we can see that the coordinates are dead in the middle of the pin. Now let's have a quick look at where our coordinates are in our slide. So we've got our slide here. Yeah, they line up. They are lining up with the pin. They're not in exactly the same spot, but that doesn't matter. Along the x-axis, they do line up with the pin. So that's important. That's what we needed to know. Let's give our Expresso null another Expresso tag. And this one needs to be the second Expresso tag. So our first one is what we've just done, and this is our second. That's how they need to be set up. So the next thing to do then is bring in the pin, and we're interested in its global position, and it will be its global position X. That's what we're interested in. And all we've got to do is pass that global position X to the global position X, or rather, in fact, it may even be the position X, but we'll say global position, the global position X of the slide. So let's bring the slide in, global position X, connect the two together. And that's as much as we need to do for our second Expresso expression. So this at the moment is quite light. We don't need to do an awful lot to make this work. So let's take our drive sprocket and see what we get. So now when we move that, we can see that our slide is behaving as we'd expect it to. And that's great. Yeah, looking really nice. And that's how you do it. It's not always complicated to do some of this stuff. It's sometimes very, very easy. But anyway, that's working fine. And it all looks really, really nice. We just have a quick go at that. We can see that it's all working beautifully. Fantastic. Now, if you want to add the motor here, again, you can add that in. For the sake of time, and you know, I'm more interested in showing you the actual mechanics of this than I am modelling, really. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to build it myself. But if you wish to build a motor, then please put one in. But anyway, that really brings us to the end of part 1 of this series, because that's what I wanted to show you in this particular tutorial. And we've got it all working and it all looks fine and dandy. So that being the case, as always, I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you've got a lot out of it, and you've got some techniques here that you can perhaps apply to some of your own projects. And if you have enjoyed the video, then please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and of course, ring the bell. And wherever you happen to be on social media, then please do share this video, because all of this good stuff really does help keep the channel moving in the right direction. But anyway, that completes part 1 of this series, so I look forward to seeing you on part 2, and we'll get a bit deeper into Expresso in part 2 when we start looking at the pneumatic rams with their spring-loaded buttons and stuff like that. That's a little bit more involved with the Expresso. But anyway, that's for next time, so I really look forward to seeing you in part 2.